Let me start by thanking Osama and his wonderful team for tonight's event. I'm most grateful and honored to be here. And thank you all. Um, I was motivated to study Qatar. I've been in Qatar since 2007 at the Georgetown campus in Doha. And one of the first things that struck me about the country was its amazing development and its relative success. And so what motivated me to write this book was the simple question of whether or not Qatar is for real. I don't know those of you, how many of you are familiar with Qatar, but in many ways this is a country that consistently punches above its weight, to use an overused metaphor. And it's a small state which tries to be extremely consequential, not only within the Arabian Peninsula and within the Persian Gulf region, but in the larger Middle East and in fact beyond. And it exercises a certain amount of power that in many ways is incommensurate with its size, its demography, and its history. In a region where relatively great powers like Egypt and Syria and Iraq and Iran and Saudi Arabia have long influenced regional affairs and have long called the shots, if you will. Qatar has been extremely consequential over the last decade and a half and has not only been extremely consequential, but it has also in many ways shaped the direction of current events and in fact history as it unfolds. So when I went there were several questions that I had. And one was what I posed to you earlier. Is Qatar for real? Is this a country that is exercising a sort of power that is fleeting and impermanent? Or is it a country that is in many ways consequential? And then if you look at Doha, it's an amazing and it's a very odd city in terms of its development. It is engaged in what you might call high modernism, with a city that is growing into the sea and into the sky with artificial islands and high rises. But it is also a city where you have very relatively little urban tradition. And the urban tradition that is there is state-directed. It's an urban tradition where the government deliberately tries to create a sort of heritage. And so the questions I had for myself were, to what extent does all of this mean anything, and how lasting is this? Is this something that's fleeting in the larger history of the Middle East, where we have the world's oldest civilizations and where we have countries that have long shaped the history of the region? And the more I studied this, the more I realized a couple of things. First of all, I realized that Qatar is indeed a success story. It's not an unqualified success, but it is in many ways a success story, and that story needs to be told. I also realized that there's a series of developments and factors that have converged at the same time to result in what might be called Qatar's moment in history. Qatar currently is riding high. It is not only punching above its weight, but it is in many ways having a number of successes that are shaping consequentially Middle Eastern history. And so Qatar is in many ways a success story that needs to be told, but again, it does have some glitches. And then I realized for myself as well as for others, it's a place that needs to be described, and it's a place that needs to be studied and analyzed because it isn't just fleeting. When I went to Qatar, I had an extremely hard time describing the place for others. I remember one of my first official meetings was with a high-ranking diplomat, and I asked him, I said, how do you describe this place to others? It's extremely difficult to describe Qatar. And the image that he said, he told me two images that stuck in my mind. One, he said, well, you know, this is like those scenes in James Bond movies where you have these national celebrations where people have their national dress and they're all getting together in beautiful colors of their own national dresses. And in many ways, Qatar resembles that. And the second image that he told me about was more lasting. He said, imagine at that time, the size of the population was about just over 1 million. He said, you have 800,000 people waiting on 200,000 people. And that image really stuck with me. And so I decided, when I wrote this book, I thought one of the first things I needed to do was to describe this this place that's difficult to describe, this odd place. And so bear with me as I attempt or read you a passage from the book and try to describe the place. And for those of you who've been in Qatar, you know there are lots of opulent buildings and very luxurious hotels. What I'm about to tell you is inspired by the description at the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Doha. There are a number of other hotels that are newer and more opulent, but this particular passage, I've been there for more than 6 years now, close to 7 years, and every time I go into the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton, I'm in many ways overwhelmed by the opulence that I see. So I decided to start out with a description of Doha, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the kinds of power and influence that I think Qatar is exerting, and what are some of the ingredients for its success that Osama mentioned. Doha may lack Dubai's obsession with bling, but it is still filled with a glitz that numbs the senses and distorts perceptions of reality. Many parts of the city resemble a surreal and incongruent mixture of Hong Kong on the one hand and Tucson, Arizona on the other. It's not surprising that today's Doha is one massive construction site. No sooner are city maps printed that they become obsolete, as new roads and multi-lane highways replace old, snaky streets. Roundabouts, marvels of traffic engineering from a bygone era, of few cars and manageable street flows, are being steadily replaced with four-corner junctions and timed traffic lights. Cranes and other heavy construction equipment are ubiquitous features of the urban landscape. Doha, it seems, is addicted to tearing up its asphalted streets as soon as they're ready for use. Entire neighborhoods made up of older shops and larger single-family homes are raised with unsettling frequency and replaced by tall, glass-covered, gleaming buildings. Remembering directions to points of interest is often an exercise in futility. Taxi passengers frequently find themselves giving direction to their drivers, many of whom are recent arrivees from Bangladesh or Ethiopia. Doha's roads and streets, meanwhile, are seldom without mangled cars strewn on the sides, a product of the world's highest and deadliest traffic accident rates. The municipality's installation of speed cameras all across the city has done little to encourage a culture of driving safely. Unsurprisingly, most Qataris prefer larger, presumably safer cars. The ubiquitous Toyota Land Cruiser, overwhelmingly in white, is the king of Doha roads, the preferred car of Qataris and a significant status symbol. In recent years, more daring colors of black and gray are also seen darting around town. All the while, the city's armies of construction workers, in their tens of thousands, remain as inconspicuous and hidden from public view as possible. The state employs a discourse revolving around the protection of the family to bar bachelors from shopping malls and the souk on so-called family days and from living in family residential areas. In this sense, bachelor is code word for migrant workers from South Asia